Hi everyone. Hi everyone, thanks for joining. We're just waiting for Poonam to join. Good afternoon, Sunil. So we're not seeing Poonam yet, so hopefully she'll be joining in the next few minutes and we can get started. Tamara team, could you, oh wait, I think she's here. Hi,
Hi, hi Shruti.
how are
How are
you?
you?
Good.
Good, good. I'm sorry,
Wonderful.
I thought you were sending me an invite, and then my team said, no, no, we'll have to go and ask for a request. Sorry,
Oh,
my bad.
no worries, no worries. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. I love having a conversation with you. You're doing so much work being sustainable in tourism. So I'm looking forward to this
Thank you.
conversation.
And our journey, Tamara's journey into sustainability really started with the daily dump,
Yes.
so many years ago. So it's actually amazing to see this happen because it's a cool connection. I think you've been on this journey almost just as long as we've been on this journey. You're
Yeah,
probably
actually,
very
I've been for 16 years. I don't know how long is Tamara?
so
16
a
years?
little. No. We started operating Tamarakur in 2012, but then I think Daily Dump would have been involved with it a little sooner than that, maybe 2010 or
Yes.
so. So, okay, so we're not as, we weren't exactly parallel, but you were very much part of the initial sort of journey that we were having in setting it up in the Tamarakur and building that foundation. So, thank you so much for joining us. Um, today is we're continuing on in the conversations that we've been having all week and at Tamara Leisure Experiences around this idea of being responsible towards our environment. And we have been speaking to phenomenal people throughout the week, really diverse and innovative climate advocates such as yourself, and everyone who's listening in, thank you for joining us. And please do leave questions as and when they come up. Please leave them in the chat and we'll try to address them towards the end. Okay, so Poonam, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, you are the founder of Daily Dump, and you and your team focus on creating engaging solutions for conscious city living. And you, as you said, you've been doing this for 16 years and are very much entrenched in this work. Your team has been making people aware of the larger picture and using simple solutions to help tackle massive problems of city waste, such as in the city of Bangalore. Daily Dump has offered a variety of products and services to help individuals, households, and organizations make the switch to a low waste life. So I'm familiar with your work and I'm a bit familiar with your journey, but for everyone who is tuning in today, would you mind telling us a little bit about how you got into this concept, how you got interested in gardening, composting, waste management, and what was the long-term vision for Daily Dump as you were sort of building the skills and the interest in this area?
Right. Um, so I think when I started, actually, I was teaching a lot around ecology, sustainability, green design. That was when I was part of the Shrishti. I had set up the program, and I was exploring this idea of how all over the world that conversation had started as to, don't you think we've reached our limits, and what are we doing about it, and how do we tell this story? Yeah, what should our attitudes be, what should our definitions be around this? And it was still a lot of people were exploring it. It was still at the exploratory phase. And I was interested to see, because I was teaching green design, I was interested to see how I could form a context for my students in our country, right? Looking at the same principles of looking at the intersection of conservation. Part of it is to live sustainably, we have to conserve. But another big part of it is, how do you regenerate? And both of them go hand in hand. And when you look at the communities in India who are facing, the threat, that looming threat of climate change, you're seeing the fact fundamentally is, how are we thinking about it? How are we thinking about how we can act on it? And very often, the most intimidating part that stops either people acting on it or governments or corporates to take action is either the legacy systems are so entrenched that you can't separate from it, you can't get out of it. To get out of it almost seems more costly. And in the short term, it looks very, very difficult. So the question was, my mind is, how can we take a long-term vision? We know that everybody who's worked in the sustainability space will tell you, you have to look at the long term. Short term, short fixes are actually much more expensive in the long run. So how do you get people invested in the long term by simple acts that they can start? How can you open a door for them where they begin that journey of questioning themselves, of doubting what is currently they are being consumed by them without almost their permission? And the fact that you're consuming without your permission is also an idea. How do you tell that story? Right? So discussions with my students, discussions with my peers at that time, got me interested in this basic question. How do you tell the story simply, which will, in a way that will give agency to many people who don't have to be experts and who just have to act? And in the fact that they act, they will start on their own personal journeys into the space. So that was the intentionality. And of course, because I was a designer, I said, all right, how could I use design to make this happen? And that's when I designed the product, because and then I had to tell the story around it. And trust me, at that time, nobody wanted to listen to the story. It was like I was really, hitting against a wall. But I think after 16 years, I think we have been instrumental in pushing this barrier, and it's had a ripple effect. The rebound positive effects is lots more people are working in this space. And the interesting thing is, if you look around Bangalore itself, there are so many women-led enterprises, small enterprises in sustainability. And my question all was, why are there so many women? And I think it's a lot to do with the fact that we've got long-term vision. We are naturally attuned to long-term interests. And therefore, it's okay for us to go and deep dive into areas which very often, I think, scares men. Or men think of it as floozy and, not technical enough. Or there is a certain, aura around it that doesn't gel with men. So when you have conversation, and that's another story that we need to tell about sustainability. It's not it's a combination of adaptation for the future, and sometimes adaptation needs to have low tech, and that's very good. And low tech does not necessarily mean going back to the Stone Age.
Absolutely. I think the solution that, for instance, you implemented in the Tamarakurg in the early days was a very low-tech solution for composting our organic waste. And to this day,
Yes.
12 years later, we actually haven't found a better solution than what you gave us, considering the climate and, you know, the soil composition and the waste that
Yeah.
we have. So it's a very simple device. I mean, it's a turning device, right? That you manually have to use, but more than any sort of tech solution, this has worked great in that climate. And we've been, I think at one point you even said, you know, we can replace it. And we were like, no, we're good. We like it. You know, let's hold on to it. Do you have any examples of, you know, you mentioned that you brought design and, you know, this topic together. Are there any early examples, I guess, like how did you get started, and early solutions that you had to this that you could talk about?
So when we did the prototyping, right? I spent about a year prototyping. We used a lot of different bought out containers, and we drilled and we made holes and we stacked and we, you know, checked for temperature and checked how long it composted, what is the leachate, what are the problems. But all of those, we learned that unless we built a kind of a, you know, we shifted the perception of waste. That was far more critical for us than actually the product. So, you know, product design sometimes says, okay, you have to look at the features, you look at convenience, you look at ease. We said we can not look at all of that. That will actually, you know, the first product I made, actually it's not very convenient to use. But over there, the idea trumped the ease of use, and the perception, change in perception trumped the ease of use. And those decisions that you had to take, and those decisions have changed over the 16 years. Now, if you ask me what kind of, we're just patenting a new product that we're putting out for home composters, and it's completely what I would call an FMCG looking product, right? So the market has changed. We actually built that market. We sold our first composter at 300 rupees, right? The same composter today sells at 3,000 rupees. The potter community who built that composter, we built it with them. They've got the government to invest a 2 crore common soil processing plant, give them land, give them houses. And so we've seen the change that has happened. And these were all design intentionalities.
That's phenomenal. And that really leads well into sort of my next question, which is about behavioral change. And how do you inspire that? Because here you actually mentioned two things. One is, of course, the consumer, right? Whoever is doing the composting at home, their mind has to be convinced, changed to say that, okay, this is something that we're committing to, and it's, you know, it's got to be easy, it's got to be functional, all of that. You also have to convince the vendor, like the other stakeholders, really, right? Which are the vendors that you mentioned, the potters who are making the item, the government, all of these other stakeholders who are involved in this process. And for that, you need to have a lot of influence, I guess, in a way, right? In terms of behavioral influence, psychological influence. And you have to, you really, I mean, for that, that's a big shift, right? Because I think, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, India, we were very much sort of like, let's consume. Let's, everything was changing economically, things were changing, things were booming, all of that. And now you're saying, hold on, there are consequences to this consumption. And, we're really creating a vicious cycle in a way, right? Of doing this without mindful, not having mindful consumption and mindful waste practices. Poonam, you're there? Oh, I think we're stuck. Hi,
hello.
sorry. Hi. Okay.
Sorry. I don't know why we just talked. Yeah.
No problem. So I was just saying that, you had to do quite a lot of work when it came to sort of managing people's really thought process around sustainable waste practices.
Yeah.
And so what went into understanding people, understanding their needs, and then being able to convert that into solutions? So
I think we did a kind of a matrix and said, all right, these are the we are preempting these problems that people perceive. And we are saying, what can we do about it? Like, look at smell, right? Smell is one big part of the process. The habit that we're trying to get them to do is understand smell. It won't smell. We're giving them a feeling that, you can solve the problem. But so we had to actually tell the story in ways that it would, work for the audience we were talking to. So we would change the story every time. If we went and talked to housekeeping staff, we take a different pitch. If we talk to corporates, we take a different pitch. The stories would change because of the context that they understood, where they were coming from. And that really made a difference. Because you can't tell the story of smell, say, to a 9-year-old and to a 50-year-old housewife with the same story. So you have to change the context, change the story. But then also you have to repeat it all the time. I think, first 6 years of my life was all about telling the story, and I think I got tired. It was just everywhere I could go, every club, every Rotary club, every RWA meet, every school, we would just tell that story. We would make sure that, you'd have to take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm going to put all my energy in this and I'm going to be there all present. So it took a lot of that kind of energy to keep that consistent message. And somewhere then it did reach out, and now you see that, the scenario has changed. And the interesting thing is we are trying to make a practice happen, right? It's like in the south of India, there's a practice of drawing kolam, right? Now, that practice is not an economy in that sense. It does not bring in revenue for the GDP, or so to speak. But it's a cultural IP, it's a cultural value, social capital, cultural capital. And this practice that we wanted to build was a sustainable capital. It was something to do with your eco capital. But it is primarily a practice. And it's a very interesting conundrum, because we are a business trying to build a practice. And it's challenging. It's very challenging, because businesses usually don't go out and build practices in that sense. They either do services or products.
Right. And it has to be ingrained in a business, right? Because you need commitment from the top, and then it needs to sort of trickle down. And it's extremely time consuming, but like you said, it's not necessarily obvious in the way that it creates revenue or saves cost. And so it requires sort of constant reiteration, and that for businesses is very tiring, right? Because they have 5,000 other priorities.
Correct.
I was just wondering, so you mentioned that, long-term impact was something that was very much in your head and in, your team's head. But when you're talking to, when you were going out to all of these places, right? Individuals, organizations, clubs, wherever, were you then talking to them about long-term impact, or were you talking about sort of short-term and telling that story in that way? Like sort of, okay, all these short-term little things, like it'll help us lead up to a long-term, or would you just not even go there in terms of trying to explain the long-term? Like what worked better?
We do both. We talk about the big picture, and then we'll try and bring it down to their own context, their own homes, their own children, and that worked, because without giving them the big picture, I.
Oh, sorry.
Sure. You turn notifications, because the notifications are dropping. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. I'm actually using somebody else's. So I think the context, we wanted to get them to understand the big picture, and then there's small action in the relationship to that big picture. So it was very important. Even though people would say, who cares, landfill is very far away, I don't give a damn. Who cares, climate change is not at all related to me. I have my own AC house. Even given that, it was still important for us to talk about the big picture. We would make fun about the big picture and the small picture, and we try and be really irreverent about all of this, because I think that finally got across. We were not preachy, we were not guilt tripping, we were not talking about how good this is, we must all be good. I don't believe we all must be good. Sometimes we have to be bad. But so it was really about being honest, being transparent, and being very human.
I know that you have done a lot of work with children as well, right? Over the years, you've done a lot of education around children. How has that experience been? Because that, I would imagine, I would assume that children are very responsive to this type of
Yes,
education.
yes.
Has that been how it is?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember we took a bunch of kids from 5 different schools under the flyover in Hebban and did a 3-month program with them
Yes.
because we wanted to understand what do children really, how do children relate to nature? Urban children,
Hmm.
not rural children, urban children. And it was really interesting because, when we talked about, say, water, right? We were telling them of how we're all drinking dinosaur pee. And when nobody's talked to them about water from that lens. And then they got very excited. And I think I think everybody who works with children will tell you that this awe and the wonder that we want to ignite in children and in adults, of course,
Hmm.
is the biggest difference because it is really wonderful, the fact that you can look at a tree and it's growing and it's magical. And if you can't have that sense of magic, how are we going to even become agents for regeneration? It's not going to happen. This is
Yeah.
not about, Excel sheets and those. It's not. There's one other part of your mind that has to get ignited.
Yeah. I remember that project, and I remember you also had a few things that like that you were sending home, like the battery boxes that you had. We still have it. We still use it in my home, actually. You know, it's a
Those
little
are things.
box that reminded us, like when you finish using a battery, like just put it into this box and then give it to the right the right the recycling unit, right? The electronic waste unit. I thought that was, I mean, it's so simple. It's so simple, but it's just a trigger, right? So in my house, like anybody, if there's a battery that's done, I know to tell them, like, just go put it in that box. We'll take care of it later, right? But it is really brilliant. And I think that kids and those like little simple things like that, they stick in the mind, you know? Um,
Yeah.
so it's quite brilliant. Yeah, I really like that one. Sorry.
It doesn't make money.
I'm sorry?
It doesn't make money.
It doesn't make money, that's true. But it is a phenomenal reminder that electronic waste is actually a serious problem, especially in urban areas where we produce plenty of it every day. And so even in a household, it is something to think about. And it's not like you have to throw it away every day. You're not doing that, but you actually like pile it up over, months and months, and
Yeah.
then you take care of it. You're right. I think, I was hearing a lot of when you hear the numbers of organizations wasting versus individuals wasting, or even recycling for that matter, right? I remember like there was this thing around how in the United States, for instance, everyone recycles, but really the amount is like a tenth or less of what needs to be recycled by all organizations across the country. It's a stark difference, right? And so as individuals, we often feel like, oh, there's so much we can do, but really I think what leaders and organizations need to do is sort of shift their mind to say, like, actually there's so much we can do on this side, right, on the organization side as opposed to the personal side. Is there anything that you're doing around awareness for organizational behavior?
Yeah, so I think we go back to the fact that we still want to focus on the individual, but the individual inside the organization can only change or prioritize, like you said, no, the 500 things that an organization has to do. Even in my role inside an organization, I have 500 priorities, and this always comes at the bottom almost. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if I, in my own role within the organization, have to change and reprioritize, I have to have this fundamental shift. It has to be an aha moment. And it would be great if it is linked to some incentive which is very tangible for that role or that person. But even if the organization is not willing to go that far, you still have to get that person to move that priority. Because how long are you going to monitor that? Your monitoring process is also will only go so far in implementation. So we are actually working on a program. It's called the Green Muscle Program. After about 16 years in this work, right? I've realized that there are some key ideas that people don't have. And that is a block to their beginning or sustaining their sustainable journeys.
Okay.
And it's those key ideas. There are a change in mental models, change in ideas of what certain attitudes that they have. If they just did a little shift, then they would actually accelerate on their own journeys and their own changes and shifts in priorities. That's what you want to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
We are working on that. I think by the end of this financial year, we should have the full program ready. And then we just want to put it out for anybody to use.
That's amazing. What a service,
Yeah.
actually, to organizations. That's wonderful. You you just mentioned climate change, I think, in passing in one of your comments. But um, when we talk about managing waste and finding sustainable solutions for managing waste, how do you think that relates to the larger, challenge of climate change? How do you see that connection happening? And so how does one influence the other?
So waste actually is the symptom of a huge industrial process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because the waste itself embodies all the energy that has happened from the time of extraction, production, transportation, consumption, and then a disposal, right? So waste actually embodies all that energy. And in fact, it's symbolic of the fact that when people say that we're only wasting 5,000 kilos or 5,000 tons in a city, it's okay, we'll find enough space to put it in. It's not the waste per se or the landfill per se that's a problem. It's the throughput. If you continue doing this, then there will be some lack, right? And while we all know this, the fact is that there's also too much of manufacturing, or you see the supply chain of some products. If you map it on the world, they're going from China to Netherlands and then coming back and then going back. And anybody, even a small child, will say, why are you journeying so far? Why is one thing that you're making in one part of the country having to go to three different locations? And when you start seeing those kind of supply chains, you suddenly realize waste is actually, you're spending so much of that fuel, so much in transportation, so much in packaging, so much in hauling. And for what? At the end, for you to get up and say, how does it connect? And you need to ask these questions. Why actually, let the big comment say, this is not such a big problem. We have problems in poverty, we have problems in energy, we have problems in water, habitation. But my response to that is, waste is a symbol. See it for what it is, and then explore enough to find that connection for yourself. Because waste is literally like one ticket and a token for you to understand this whole mess. Because it's at the very end.
Sorry, my son.
Is it son?
my,
Yeah?
my son, yeah, he's
Just ask him what he thinks about it.
about
Let's
waste.
call him and say,
He's no, I mean
oh, yeah.
it's incredible actually, like what they learn about waste in school, and and the lessons that they have, and sort of how he comes back and he tells us, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that.
Yeah, I think those guys change the world. I think
No,
he'll
really.
come to you one and say, Mom, this is not how you run this. I'll tell you how to run it.
Absolutely, and I welcome it, right? Because I think that's the thing. I mean, in this sort of, we have to break that cycle of how we think. And even organizations that, we want to be as responsible as possible, there's always room for improvement. There's always something more that we can do. So I hope that he does come to one day and tells me, like, let's do this, better. And I have a solution for you. So that would be great. Government and legislation have a very large role to play, I would say, in sort of especially urban planning of waste management, and really any place. But I think in urban areas we're producing probably far more waste than some of these rural areas. How do you foresee that they're going to work in this sort of mission of creating cleaner households, cleaner cities, and cleaner states and regions?
So I think that the government is doing whatever it can. In the sense that before the Swachh Bharat Mission, there was a national sanitation project. I think urban centers are getting more funding to, either implement uh, better waste management, collection, disposal, scientific waste management. So there is enough money being put in the urban centers. While we may think that the rural centers don't have a problem, actually they have a worse problem.
Oh,
They're burning
interesting.
all their waste. Yeah, you go into any village, and this was not there 25 years ago, right? When we used to travel in India, every village was almost pristine in itself, right?
Hmm.
Now you travel highways, you're entering any small town, the first thing you meet is plastic waste heaped on the wayside because they don't have any landfill, they don't have a collection system, and they don't know what to do with it, so they're burning a lot of it. What they don't realize is they're creating so much toxicity in their own environment, and it's going to affect the biodiversity, all of, and their own, and their
The
own
water
children
table. Right.
actually don't know, because India has this notion that fire heals, and
Uh-huh.
fire is a sanctifying, healing, purifying entity. Our rituals are around fire. So when you go and talk to a villager and say, do not burn, he looks at you and says, why? It will become pure, it will become clean.
Right. That's
So
so
the issue,
interesting.
yeah, and you dig, you take JCB and you dig inside a road near a village, right? And you'll
Mhm.
find it string plastic. It's scary, actually.
So, what is the solution then there? Because I mean, again, waste management, like that waste collection, that is essentially what then the panchayat's responsibility to manage
Yes,
and to connect? Is that what,
yes.
are there places where
And
you
the
see that that's happening?
yeah, no, and very often they don't know what to do, and
Okay.
there's not enough expertise flowing. No, knowledge also has to flow, right? Resource people have to be available. They may have the funds from the central government or the state government, but there's no implementation capacity. And so when there is no capacity, then you don't know what to do. It's like one of the things that I I can't reiterate it for enough. I feel we're losing so much knowledge. Like we're a very small firm, right? And
Hmm.
we hire people who are not hireable anywhere else because
Right.
we can't afford the salaries that other people pay, right? And what I'm seeing is even young people who are coming out of simple government schools, say, and who want a job, they finish their graduation, they do a degree that they don't have any interest in. They don't know how to manage their time, they don't know how to write a letter, they don't know how to speak. And this, it was not like that 15, 20 years ago. And I'm talking about this knowledge and even knowledge in villages. You go to villagers and you say, do you know how to save rice like your grandmother did? They don't
Hmm.
know.
They don't know. The knowledge is not being passed down.
And it's a lot of work. Lots of NGOs are doing great work in this area, but there is so much more to be done. And
Yeah.
I'm just, sustainability knowledge that we're talking about, how do we make it stick? How do we make it sexy enough, cool enough for the generation to endure it? The reason why you give up a practice is that you didn't believe in it. But how do you make our practices like a composting process? I'm talking about the composting process. How will I ensure that the daughter will still do it?
Right. It's a tough question, right? I think,
Yeah,
um, like you said, the only way to kind of influence that is to make sure the practice itself happens. And like
yeah, yeah,
this thought that fire purifies, for instance, which is culturally ingrained, it becomes
yeah,
something like that where people realize, oh, like, we have to be more responsible with what we consume and then what we waste of it. And of course, I think there's good work happening, like you said, but and I don't know if it's necessarily the solution is to be louder, but maybe to be more connected in a way, and
yeah,
find bridges for different people to kind of
yeah.
come on board. I mean, it's a
Yeah, I
really
think,
interesting question that you put out there.
yeah. Like we went on a landfill, right on top, and there were tomatoes growing, right?
Hmm.
Actually, tomatoes. And so the guys who rack picked there, no, they were picking up the tomatoes. I said, what are you going to do with them? And they said, we're going to go home and eat it. I said,
Yeah.
you know, this is not at all healthy for you. He said, of course not. It's fruit.
Right.
So it has to be okay.
Man,
So
it's very
what,
sad, actually.
yeah, yeah. And you know, that's very hard for them to understand.
Yeah.
We try, but then I realized this is not my place, you know. In fact, they really believe that. And I mean, of course, we said, all right, you know, it's bad because of this. And they looked at us and they said, you know, maybe you're kidding us.
Yeah, you just don't want us to have this tomato. Somebody else is gonna get it. It's a very a scary thought actually in that matter. And I guess that makes the education part of what you do even more important because children, at least you can inspire them. You can sort of get their imaginations to understand why that tomato is bad, right? When you get them early, you know, the concept almost will absorb much easier than trying to change somebody's mind when they're a bit older.
Yeah.
And I think that work is really important. Is there an ecosystem wherein, you know, different people who are doing this kind of work? I mean, of course, there, you know, you and I are having this conversation and we're bringing sort of two different platforms together, and you know what we do in the business, you know, the business of what we do is very different. Oh, I lost you again. You there? Okay.
Again, this is,
No problem.
yeah. Yeah,
So
you're bringing two platforms. Yeah.
right. And you know, so, and obviously like the work that we do is different but complementary in a way, right? Because, you know, we focus a lot on waste management within our sort of greater organization and in serving guests and all of that and in the mission that we have. And then, you know, and you in the nonprofit, you are doing a lot to do with awareness building and solution creation to this issue. Is there any sort of existing ecosystem that is there for organizations who are interested in these types of ideas to come together? Like, does it exist right now, like an NGO network of some sort or anything of that sort
Of
when it
course,
comes to waste management?
there are many. There are many. In India, there are many. In Bangalore itself, there is SWMRT. And we are not an NGO, Shruti. We are a
Oh, I'm
social
sorry.
enterprise. We are for profit.
You're
Actually,
for,
we call ourselves not
what was
for
that?
greed. Not for greed.
Okay.
We,
No, but
we,
that's
we say
brilliant.
we are not.
Social enterprise is an amazing, and I mean, that's amazing. That is, I think that's the way you scale, right? So,
Yeah, but yeah, no. There are. I think that the challenge is that how do we push this to be it's very hard to showcase what is not visible.
hmm
And my question always is, how does a business manage to do that? Because our notions of business are very often either you pick up something and you drop something or sell something. But how do you get, and if it all this time it's sitting in the area of education, I'm saying education itself cannot do this.
yeah,
We cannot no longer trust education to do it. It has to be a much more, and that's where I feel corporates and governments and all need to rethink as to how they're going to do work in this area, which is a little more urgent, you know,
hmm
because there is an urgent, and very often the rhetoric goes back to business as usual. You have an ESG component, but it's not enough.
yeah,
It's not enough because I know, you know, because we talk to the lower down cadre of any organization, and then you realize, even today, right? We had the Environment Day. Our people went and did a demo in a very large tech company, and who was on the and they didn't the people who organized it didn't tell our people that people will be Kannada speaking only. Only the housekeeping staff will come in. So my
oh,
question, how do you relegate waste knowledge of waste management only to housekeeping? If you
yeah,
give that message within your company, then what happens is you're reaffirming the same legacy thinking. Now,
Absolutely.
this is something that we cannot, it's all the time we face this, right? And a waste management company that I know of goes to a organization in a tech company because they have to tick off the ESG thing that Environment Day we did something, right? So they'll call some, yeah. So those guys will come, poor things, they'll come and set up the little stall in the canteen or in the hallway, on the walkway. I'm saying walkway canteen is not going to give the impression this is important.
Yeah. No,
But how do
absolutely.
you communicate this to the HR department? How do you communicate this to the people who take the decisions, all the adults in the room? So that's why, when people ask me, why don't you work with governments, corporates and government? I say, no, I don't want to work with anybody. I'm doing my work. I'll try and amplify it. Who wants it, they come and take it. After a point, this my job is not to go and convince somebody, look, boss, your messaging is wrong. You don't realize, you're not aware what you're doing. By the very
Hmm.
act of the mission, you're creating a problem. You're omitting putting those people right up in front. You know?
Do you think
So
it's
these
getting
things,
better?
it's not fast enough.
It's not fast enough. Yeah.
It's not fast enough.
Hmm. It's
And
yeah.
even
Tough.
if you look at public travel, public transport in the city, in all our cities, um, it's not fast enough because I really feel our mental models have not changed.
Mhm. No, and I think, as you said, at one point, it needs to be in the KRAs. And I think that's, for Tamara, that's been something which has been very clear from the get-go, that, sustainability is part of our core value system. And so it has to be in everyone's KRA. So, our KRAs are typically split, right? There's a customer component, an employee component, um, and then there's a sustainability component always for everybody. And because, even though we have a head of sustainability or we do a World Environment Day program, sustainability is really everyone's responsibility. But I see where you're coming from. Like, it's an incredibly difficult thing for organizations who don't have this value system ingrained. Oh, lost you again. Ah, you're
Sorry.
back. Okay.
That's
No,
okay
so I
now.
was just saying that,
Yeah.
like, even it's in, it is difficult for organizations who don't have it ingrained in them from the get-go
So
to
sorry,
implement that.
Shruti.
But
Huh.
honestly, no, no problem. Are you back? Hopefully, Poonam will be back shortly. If anyone has any questions, please put them into the chat below, and we can take them up at the end. Hi.
Hi, sorry.
No problem. No, no, no.
Technology.
No problem. It happens. No, so I was just saying that I think, but I do also think that for organizations that, moving to sustainability is a journey, right? Um, and the hope is that, like, they do understand. One of the things that we use as part of sort of our storytelling as such when it comes to sustainability is really this idea that, if you can do sustainability thoughtfully, you can actually make it, it's actually profitable to do so, right? In the sense
Yeah.
that you are consuming less, therefore your costs come down. Your waste is getting converted into something else useful. So for instance, where, we have farmland, we're actually, that compost is going straight back in there and we're not having to buy fertilizers and so on and so forth. Even, right now we're implementing some solar projects, and the ROI for those projects has become extremely attractive because the technology has improved immensely over the last couple of years. So it's a message that we've been using to get it out there.
Yeah.
We see it in practice, and hopefully, I think that hopefully dialogues like this, and, dialogues which are not, the other thing I think that has to change, and often with many issues that often happens, is that the conversations are very insular. So it's a lot of
Yeah.
people talking about sustainability to people who are already bought into sustainability. And that doesn't
Yeah.
make sense, right? And that's easy in a sense, right? Because what is there to
Yeah.
convince at that point, right? So I think the hard part for for people like yourself, and the unfortunate burden that a lot of us, I think, put on people such as yourself, is the hope, is this hope that we will be able to spread that message and get it out there
Yeah.
to a wider population and convince them that this is what's needed, right? I mean,
Yeah.
plastics seeping into our water table and poisoning
Yeah.
people. I mean, that's horrible, right? I mean, and that's not a future that any of us want. And hopefully we will see some change. I'm optimistic, but I know I see your point. It's definitely not happening fast enough.
Yeah. No, I think that you have. I think this age is like that, right? That just now a lady has brought out a book called the Dread Generation. You know,
Mm-hmm.
our generation seems to be, or this time on the face of the world, especially after COVID and all of that. I feel that we are living in an age where we have to have hope, but we also have to acknowledge that how we did things is no longer valid.
Yeah.
I think that needs to happen fast enough. And it's okay, like, if businesses keep, I think to sell the sustainability, it's not, first of all, it's not an ideology. It's very contextual, and it needs to be different in different cultures. And the scary bit is if it becomes an ideology or it becomes a corporatization of a plan like an ESG or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will not serve the commons if it goes that route. I think a part component, like you said, legislation is important. Some part of it has to be borne by public money.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and so those are realisms around the sustainability rhetoric. I feel that I would still say I would like to focus. If somebody said, in which area would you like to focus? I'd still go back and say it's the mental models that people need to change. Because the minute you change your own mental model, right? I mean, I'll tell you, I was 45 when somebody told me that you're a porous thing. I was walking around like I was made of steel. And they explained it in a way that I said, why didn't somebody tell me? It's not that I didn't go to biology class and learn there are stomata in your damn skin. But that was not the way it was explained.
Mm-hmm.
And now it sense to me, oh, that's why we shouldn't put poison on our skin.
Yeah.
But it's ideas like that, right? And those stay because those you can tell stories, you can weave your cultural, myths around it. And I think that bit is happening actually in the social enterprise and the NGO space, and influencers are doing that work for society.
Mm-hmm.
Corporates are not doing enough.
Yeah.
You have to, like you say, you should amplify those bits. You should really become funny and contextual. Like Odisha should have its that state should have its own myth about how water is placed. And then you'll save water. Otherwise, it's not
Yeah.
going to happen.
There was that movie, long back, that I think brought about some interest for a moment in water conservation. What was it? The Shah Rukh Khan movie, Swadesh,
Swadesh, correct,
right? And
correct.
it became sort of this national conversation. Um,
Yeah, that's what fascinates me. You go to, I've seen that Rajendra Singh's watershed movement in Rajasthan. I've actually gone through
mhm.
those villages. And you go there and you go 50 kilometers and the knowledge is not there.
Hmm.
I am fascinated by that. I'm fascinated that within 50, 80, 100 kilometers,
Right.
one set of people are experiencing it and another set are not. And my question always is maybe, your idea of bridging and amplifying is all the more important.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really, it's scary, right? Because I think sometimes we're so sort of involved in this sort of virtual conversation. This 50 kilometers is not far at all. I mean, a
Yeah,
movement. should be able to move that far. And we have this impression, no, it's global, it's everywhere, but really the simplest thing hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So we're tricking ourselves almost sometimes. Okay, there's one or two questions. What are some auxiliary industries to composting that you partner with, and can organizations get on board in building an ecosystem for better waste management?
Oh yes, I, I think unless we, when 16 years ago, there was no question of collaboration because there were not many players.
Mm.
Now we should. Now we have to. You saying that are there networks? I think there needs to be a network for social enterprises for working the space to really collaborate to do much more. There is lots to be done.
Yeah, I agree. We've
If
seen
anybody
a
wants
bit of that.
to
I'm sorry?
if anybody wants to join, I don't know who asked the question, but if
Oh,
anybody wants to, please come.
I mean, emo life stories. I'm calling you out. No, I think, we've seen some success with collaboration and platform building in education. In the philanthropic side of Tamil Leisure Experiences, there's an organization called Shiksha Lokam. I'm sorry, and Shiksha Lokam, not Shiksha Lokam, Edumentum, which is an incubator which works with NGOs across the country that work on transformation of schools, whole school transformation, so really working with public schools and low income private schools. And, it's an incubator model. So you have a class of 12 NGOs that come together, they share their knowledge, they brainstorm, and then they go back to their localities, whether it's in Punjab or in Assam or Bihar, and then they are able to implement. But it's a beautiful model in education that has worked quite well, and I think there's now over 100 or so organizations who have come together and done this. So maybe somebody needs to do this in waste, in waste management. I think because like you said, this is a concept which is important in every city, in every, rural and urban parts of our country. And, a lot of ideation and collaboration I would imagine would take it quite a long way. Okay, I have one more question. I think this is the last one. You mentioned the importance of wonder in building people's sense of stake in the planet and its beauty. What are some ways we can introduce this sense of wonder or magic in adults? Any thoughts?
That's a very large question.
It is, yeah. It's not an easy one. It's not an easy one at all,
I wish
actually.
I could wave a wand and say, now you shall henceforth have wonder. And leave it at that. I can't.
Is there a
But yeah,
story that you've told that has
I
really
think wonder
inspired
is
you?
very related to how much of yourself you think you know, right? If you think you know everything, you cannot wonder. You have to start the day by saying, I don't know shit. And then maybe you'll feel wonder during the day. Yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, I mean, that's how I find.
Oh, I think we lost her again. She should be back in a few seconds. If anyone has, we have a few more minutes. So if anyone has any more questions, maybe we can take one more question once Poonam is back. Oh, okay. All right. So hopefully she'll be back very soon. But um, I hope everyone found this conversation, inspiring on its own. I think we've got her back. One second. Okay,
Sorry.
you're back. No problem.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
no, I think I was just wondering, is there any story which you've told which has, which sticks out, which you remember, really sort of triggering the imagination of people?
I Imagination of people. Yeah. I remember I was telling a very conservative middle class housewife about why she should buy a composter for her daughter for her dowry, for her wedding dowry. And so that lady said, nonsense, I'm not buying. So I was telling her, I said, see, you buy a fridge, no? Why do you buy a fridge? You buy a fridge because you are extending the life. The tomato is going to die. You're putting the tomato in the fridge saying, thoda aur reh jao. No, you're extending the death. That means you're just delaying the death of that poor tomato. Yeah? Yeah, that I agree, she said. I said, I'm telling you, buy a composter because that tomato will die. No, this will give it new life.
Mhm.
Do you want a delaying death mechanism or do you want a regenerating system? Which do you want to gift your daughter? She said, आपने तो ऐसे बता दिया. I said, हाँ मैंने आपको ऐसे बता दिया. She said, हाँ ये समझ आया मेरे को. So I was very happy that she actually was willing to accept that the composter is a life-giving product.
Mhm.
And why would you not have it in your house?
Yeah,
So
makes a lot
I
of
think
sense to
that,
me.
yeah,
It's a lovely story.
those are,
Thank you.
those are the moments, highlight moments. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you have plenty more highlights, but I think we're wrapping up here. So thank you again so much for
I'm
coming and
sorry about
joining
my
us.
internet connection and my
It's okay.
technology. I'm really sorry, Shruti.
It happens.
Um,
Don't worry about it. It wasn't that bad at all. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I think, the relationship that Daily Dump and Damra has had has been, it goes way back. And,
yes,
it's a real pleasure to have you on today and to be able to ask these questions, in a setting and be able to share, your insights and your journey. So thank you so much. Everyone who joined,
thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Take care.
Thank you. Everyone who joined, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your questions, for participating. Tomorrow, we will be having another session with Vishwanath Srikantaya, who is a trustee of the Biome Environmental Trust and a water activist who will be addressing how urban planning can make better use of natural resources to improve the quality of life and combat climate change. So again, thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow. That session will be happening at 4 p.m. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.